heart pounded as he reached the top of the staircase, the muffled sounds from the bedroom confirming his worst fears. Pushing the door open, he froze. There was Linda, laughing and completely unashamed, tangled in the sheets with Lavalier. Rage overtook him, blinding and uncontrollable. In that moment, years of trust shattered, leaving Jim to make a decision that would change all their lives forever. What he did next stunned everyone, sparking a legal battle and a media storm that no one could have predicted. But before we dive deeper into this gripping story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this tale, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another captivating story. Jim Freeland sat in the defendant's chair, his wrists bound by handcuffs as the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Facing charges of assault, Jim had become an unlikely public figure in a case that captured the nation's attention. His opening words, "At least I still have my balls," echoed through the courtroom, drawing sharp gasps and scattered laughter. The remark, brazen yet unapologetic, painted a vivid picture of the defiance that defined his character. The judge, a stern but sharp-witted woman, raised an eyebrow and advised caution, though a faint smirk betrayed her amusement. Meanwhile, Jim's high priest lawyer, a polished professional named Mr. Perkins, winced at his client's reckless candor. He had begged Jim to avoid such statements, emphasizing the need to maintain public sympathy that judges often took into account during sentencing. Jim's legal representation was funded by a surprising source, a GoFundMe campaign organized by his loyal best friend, Dave. This grassroots effort had snowballed, with thousands of strangers contributing to support Jim, who had become something of a folk hero. The case wasn't just about assault. It had become a symbol of standing up to betrayal and arrogance. The media had latched onto the story, particularly the unsavory details about Mark Lavalier, the victim of Jim's assault. Once a celebrated football star, Lavalier's reputation was tarnished by his history of infidelity and predatory behavior. As reporters swarmed outside the courtroom, Jim's defiance and Lavalier's disgrace continued to feed a public frenzy. The stage was set for a dramatic trial, one where justice, betrayal, and public opinion collided. Jim remembered the night vividly, a seemingly normal evening that would later unravel his life. He, his wife Linda, and their 16-year-old son Ethan had gone out to a local bar, a rare family outing meant to break the monotony of their routines. The atmosphere was light, filled with the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversations. Ethan sipped a soda, laughing at a joke his father told, while Linda, as radiant as ever, seemed in high spirits. For a moment it felt like a perfect snapshot of their family. That was until Mark Lavalier entered the scene. Lavalier, a former football star with a reputation for arrogance, made his way through the bar, greeting people with the confidence of someone used to admiration. When his eyes landed on Linda, he wasted no time approaching her. With a charming smile, he extended his hand and asked her to dance. And Jim's stomach knotted instantly. Something about Lavalier set him on edge, but he chose not to make a scene. "It's just a dance," he told himself, though his discomfort grew as he watched Linda accept the invitation without hesitation. She danced with Lavalier for one song, then another, and yet another. Jim's forced smile faltered, and Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly sensing the tension. "Mom's acting weird," Ethan muttered, his voice low. Jim gave a nonchalant shrug, trying to dismiss it, but he couldn't ignore the pang of unease in his chest. When Linda finally returned to the table, her cheeks flushed and her laughter too bright, Jim hoped that was the end of it. But Linda's attention seemed distant, and the family dynamic felt subtly fractured. Ethan tried to steer the conversation back to normal, cracking jokes and asking about the upcoming weekend plans, but Linda only gave vague responses, her gaze darting around the room. Later that evening, as Jim turned to order another drink, Linda disappeared. He glanced around the bar but saw no sign of her. Panic started to bubble as Ethan leaned over and whispered, "Where's Mom?" Jim's unease turned into dread. A sinking feeling told him exactly where Linda had gone, and when he asked the bartender, his suspicions were confirmed. "She left with that guy she was dancing with," the bartender said, his tone indifferent. Jim clenched his fists, trying to keep his composure. Ethan, sitting beside him, looked confused and worried. "What's going on, Dad?" he asked. "I need to check something," Jim replied, grabbing his jacket. "Stay here. I won't be long." Ethan protested, but Jim reassured him before rushing out. He had a good idea where Lavalier lived. Stories of the former athlete's flashy lifestyle were well known around town. Driving with a mix of anger and desperation, Jim arrived at Lavalier's house within minutes. The sight of Lavalier's car parked in the open garage confirmed everything. Back at the bar, Ethan sat alone, nervously checking the time. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but a sense of foreboding weighed heavily on him. When a neighbor called later to tell him about police activity at Lavalier's house, Ethan's confusion turned into fear. "Dad? What did you do?" he whispered to himself, the night's events taking a darker turn than he could have imagined. Jim pulled into Lavalier's driveway, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The sight of Lavalier's flashy car parked in the open garage confirmed his worst fears. Every rational thought in his mind was overpowered by a surge of anger and humiliation. He stepped out of the car and approached the house, finding the garage door slightly ajar and the internal door unlocked. His heart pounded as he entered, the stillness of the house broken only by faint noises coming from upstairs. With each step up the staircase, Jim's rage built. His thoughts raced between disbelief and betrayal, the image of Linda smiling and laughing with Lavalier flashing through his mind. When he reached the top of the stairs, the muffled sounds became unmistakable, a mix of voices and movement coming from a bedroom with the door left partially open. Peering inside, Jim froze. Linda was in bed with Lavalier, both of them completely unaware of his presence. Linda's laughter echoed painfully in his ears, shattering any hope that this was a misunderstanding. She wasn't reluctant or caught off guard. She was a willing participant. The sight of his wife, the mother of his son, in such an intimate position with another man felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Humiliation turned into a blinding rage. Jim didn't remember making a conscious decision. His body seemed to act on its own. He burst into the room, his voice a roar of anger. Lavalier barely had time to react before Jim's years of rugby training kicked in. A powerful kick connected squarely with Lavalier's groin, sending him tumbling off the bed in agony. Linda screamed, frozen in shock as Lavalier writhed on the floor. Jim stood over him, breathing heavily, the enormity of what he had done not yet registering. The chaos didn't last long. The police arrived quickly, likely alerted by a neighbor who heard the commotion. Jim was arrested on the spot, his hands cuffed behind his back as the officers led him out of the house. Lavalier was taken to the hospital, his injuries severe but not life-threatening. Linda, wrapped in a robe, stood at the doorway, her expression a mix of fear and shame. Jim didn't look back at her as he was loaded into the police car, the weight of betrayal and his own actions sinking in. Back at home, Ethan received a call from a concerned neighbor. "There's police at Lavalier's house," the neighbor said. "Your dad's there. I think something happened." Ethan's heart sank. His mind raced with questions. Why had his mother left with Lavalier? What had his dad done? He sat on the couch, staring at his phone, torn between anger at his mother and worry for his father. The betrayal was undeniable, but so was the fear that his family might be permanently broken. Hours later, when the full story reached him, Ethan felt a mixture of heartbreak and loyalty. His mother's actions had shattered their family, but his father's impulsive reaction left them all reeling. That night, Ethan vowed to stand by his dad, knowing they would need each other more than ever in the days ahead. Jim's reaction was swift and devastating. Fueled by the humiliation and betrayal burning inside him, he channeled his years of rugby training into a single calculated strike. His foot connected with Lavalier's groin, a precise and forceful kick that left the disgraced football star crumpled on the floor gasping for air. Lavalier's face contorted in agony, his hands clutching at himself as he writhed in pain. Linda stood frozen in shock, her mouth agape, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. The room was silent for a moment, save for Lavalier's pained moans. Jim, standing over the man, looked down with a mixture of satisfaction and rage. His mind raced, but there was no regret in that moment. He had evened the score in his own way. However, the sound of approaching sirens broke through his haze of anger, signaling that his impulsive act would soon have consequences. The police arrived quickly, entering the house to find Jim still standing over Lavalier, who was now barely able to move. Jim offered no resistance as they placed him in handcuffs. As they led him outside, Linda, still clad in a hastily thrown-on robe, appeared at the doorway. Her face was a mix of fear, shame, and disbelief. Jim didn't look at her. He couldn't bear to. He kept his head high as the officers escorted him to the waiting patrol car. The scene at Lavalier's house drew immediate attention. Neighbors gathered, whispering and pointing as the police secured the area. Word spread quickly, and by the time Jim reached the station, the media had already picked up the story. Lavalier, a once famous athlete with a tarnished reputation, was now the subject of public ridicule. The severity of his injuries became the focal point of the narrative, his groin injury requiring surgery, rendering him unable to father children, according to sensationalized reports. Ethan, at home, received the news from a neighbor. The call confirmed his worst fears. His father had been arrested. Though he was young, Ethan understood the weight of the situation. His mother's betrayal had shattered their family, but it was his father's arrest that left him feeling helpless. Ethan made a decision that night to support his dad no matter what. "You didn't deserve this, Dad," he muttered to himself, vowing to stand by Jim in the fight that was sure to come. Meanwhile, as news of the incident spread, public opinion began to shift overwhelmingly in Jim's favor. The revelation of Lavalier's long history of infidelity and arrogance painted him as a villain rather than a victim. Stories emerged from other husbands and families who had been similarly hurt by Lavalier's actions, and a wave of sympathy for Jim followed. The public's support materialized in a tangible way. Jim's best friend, Dave, created a GoFundMe campaign to help cover the legal costs for his defense. Within hours, the campaign gained traction, and donations poured in from strangers who saw Jim as a man pushed to the brink by betrayal. The campaign became a viral sensation, raising tens of thousands of dollars and garnering attention from national media outlets. Headlines like, "Husband stands up to cheating wife and arrogant football star," and "Public backs betrayed husband in David Goliath case," flooded social media. Ethan played an active role in advocating for his father. He posted heartfelt messages online, sharing his perspective as a son caught in the middle of a painful family crisis. "My dad isn't a bad person," he wrote. "He's a good man who was hurt in the worst way possible. I don't condone what he did, but I understand why he did it. He didn't deserve this betrayal." Ethan's words struck a chord, and his posts were shared widely, further amplifying the support for Jim. In contrast, Lavalier faced a wave of public mockery. His groin injury became the subject of jokes and memes, with many reveling in the irony of a man known for his ego being brought down so dramatically. "At least I still have my balls," a phrase Jim had allegedly muttered, became a rallying cry for his supporters and a cutting jab at Lavalier's expense. Even Linda couldn't escape the fallout. Her affair with Lavalier and her role in the incident were laid bare for all to see. Friends distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Public condemnation followed her wherever she went, turning her life into a spiral of shame and isolation. Despite the chaos, Jim remained steadfast in his resolve. From his jail cell, he began to see the overwhelming public support as a glimmer of hope. His lawyer, funded by the GoFundMe campaign, assured him that they had a strong defense, leaning on the argument that Jim's actions were the result of extreme emotional provocation. While the legal process unfolded, Jim found solace in knowing that Ethan was on his side. As the trial date approached, the courtroom became the epicenter of the public's fascination with the case. Reporters gathered outside, eager to capture every moment, while inside, Jim prepared to tell his story. He understood that he had made a choice in the heat of the moment, a choice that carried consequences. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. The support of his son, his friend Dave, and countless strangers reminded him that, even in the face of betrayal and humiliation, resilience and redemption were still possible. The courtroom fell silent as the judge adjusted her glasses, her expression a mix of seriousness and subtle empathy. She addressed the court, summarizing the facts of the case and the events that had brought them there. "Mr. Freeland," she began, "your actions were unquestionably severe, and under ordinary circumstances, such an assault would warrant a harsh sentence. However, these are not ordinary circumstances," the judge continued, outlining the emotional provocation Jim had faced upon discovering his wife's infidelity with Lavalier. She acknowledged that while the law did not excuse acts of violence, it also recognized the unique emotional turmoil provocation could cause. "In light of the extraordinary betrayal you endured and the absence of premeditation in your actions, I find it appropriate to impose a reduced sentence." With a pause that seemed to stretch for eternity, she announced her decision. "You are sentenced to time served and 3 years of probation." A collective murmur swept through the courtroom, and Jim's shoulders sagged with a mixture of relief and gratitude. The judge wasn't finished, however. Turning her gaze toward Lavalier, who sat with his lawyer, she added pointedly, "Let this be a reminder that your actions, both on that night and in the years leading up to it, carry consequences. Mr. Freeland's behavior is inexcusable, but your own conduct contributed to this tragedy." Jim's lawyer, visibly relieved, patted him on the shoulder. The judge's words struck a chord not only with Jim but also with the audience in the courtroom and, later, the public at large. The judge's decision ignited a media firestorm. Within hours, headlines like "Husband Freed After Emotional Courtroom Testimony" and "Judge Slams Disgraced Athlete in Viral Cheating Scandal" dominated news outlets. On social media, the public embraced Jim as a heroic underdog who had stood up against betrayal and arrogance. The phrase, "At least I still have my balls," became a rallying cry, emblazoned on memes, t-shirts, and hashtags. Lavalier, on the other hand, faced the full brunt of public ridicule. His attempt to rehabilitate his image with a press conference only made matters worse. Standing on the courthouse steps, he declared, "This verdict is a miscarriage of justice. What happened to me was barbaric." However, his complaints were drowned out by a wave of jeers from the gathered crowd. Cameras captured his discomfort, and social media turned his appearance into a spectacle. The backlash was swift and unforgiving. Lavalier's press conference was derided as tone-deaf, further tarnishing his reputation. Clips of him fumbling through his statements were spliced with satirical captions and sound effects, making him the subject of mockery across the internet. His fall from grace was now complete. The emotional high point of the trial came when Ethan, Jim's 16-year-old son, took the stand. As he walked to the witness box, his face pale but resolute, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew this was not just a legal case but a deeply personal story of a family torn apart. Ethan's voice trembled as he began his testimony, but he quickly steadied himself. "I want to talk about what this has done to my family," he said, his tone somber but clear. "My dad is not a violent man. He's a good man who works hard and always puts family first. What happened that night wasn't just about what my dad saw. It was about everything he felt, the betrayal, the humiliation, and the heartbreak." Ethan paused, glancing toward his mother, who sat with her head down, avoiding eye contact. "When my mom left the bar with Lavalier, I didn't understand what was happening at first. I kept thinking, she'll come back, this can't be real. But then she didn't come back, and I knew something was wrong. That's when my dad rushed out. I stayed behind, feeling helpless, not knowing what to do, and then I got the call." The courtroom hung on his every word. Ethan's voice cracked as he described the moment he learned of his father's arrest. "I was angry at my mom for what she did to us, but I was also scared for my dad. I didn't know what would happen to him. All I knew was that I needed to support him because he didn't deserve any of this." Ethan's testimony was as much a plea for understanding as it was an indictment of the events that had shattered his family. "What my dad did wasn't right, but I understand why he did it. He's human and he was pushed to his breaking point. I don't condone violence, but I also can't ignore the pain he was feeling." The young man's words resonated deeply, not only with those in the courtroom but also with the millions who followed the case through the media. Ethan's honesty and vulnerability humanized the ordeal, making it clear that this was not just a story about infidelity or assault, but a story about a family struggling to survive betrayal. When Ethan stepped down from the stand, he received an outpouring of quiet support. Members of the jury nodded sympathetically, and even the judge's stern demeanor softened. Jim's lawyer leaned over and whispered, "You've got a hell of a son there, Jim." The courtroom atmosphere shifted after Ethan's testimony. The jury, the judge, and even the spectators seemed to view Jim in a more compassionate light. Linda sat silently, her face pale, as the weight of her actions became undeniable. Lavalier, who had previously exuded arrogance, now looked visibly uncomfortable, his usual bravado diminished. The judge's final remarks underscored the emotional complexity of the case. While she reiterated that violence was not the answer, she acknowledged the unique circumstances that had driven Jim to his actions. Her condemnation of Lavalier's behavior carried a message that resonated far beyond the courtroom. Actions have consequences, and betrayal can ripple out to affect everyone involved. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted into a mix of quiet applause and murmurs of approval. Jim, while grateful for the reduced sentence, felt the enormity of the moment. He turned to Ethan, who met his gaze with a small, reassuring smile. For the first time in months, Jim felt a glimmer of hope. In the days that followed, Ethan's testimony and the judge's words became focal points in the media coverage. The story of a father and son navigating betrayal and heartbreak captured the public's imagination. Jim became a symbol of resilience, while Ethan's role in advocating for his father earned widespread admiration. As for Lavalier, his fall from grace continued. The ridicule he faced on social media showed no signs of abating, and sponsors distanced themselves from the disgraced athlete. Linda, too, struggled with the consequences of her actions. Estranged from her son and ostracized by her community, she faced a lonely and uncertain future. Meanwhile, Jim and Ethan began the process of rebuilding their lives. Though the road ahead would not be easy, they faced it together, their bond strengthened by the trials they had endured. For Jim, the verdict was not just a legal victory but a chance to start anew, a second chance he vowed not to waste. Mark Lavalier's life unraveled rapidly after the trial. Once a celebrated football star, his tarnished reputation became the subject of relentless media coverage. The story of his affair and the subsequent courtroom drama painted him not as a victim but as a man whose arrogance and unethical behavior had finally caught up with him. His groin injury, which became a source of mockery across social media, earned him the cruel nickname No Balls Lavalier. The fallout extended beyond public ridicule. Sponsors pulled their endorsements, citing his damaged public image as a liability. His team, facing mounting pressure, released him from his contract. Lavalier tried to transition into a broadcasting career, but networks distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with his controversy. The financial impact was devastating. His earnings plummeted by over 90%, forcing him to sell his luxury cars and downsize from his extravagant home. Lavalier also faced ridicule from former teammates and fans. At games, chants mocking his injury echoed through stadiums, further tarnishing his dignity. A particularly infamous moment came when an opposing player whispered, "At least I still have my balls," during a minor league game. Lavalier's public response, a slap, earned him a suspension and further damaged his reputation. Within months, his career was effectively over, leaving him a disgraced figure with few prospects. Linda's life took an equally dramatic turn for the worse. Once seen as a charming wife and mother, she quickly became a pariah within her social circle. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with the woman whose betrayal and public humiliation had become headline news. Linda's attempts to justify her actions were met with scorn, leaving her isolated and alone. Her relationship with Ethan, already strained, disintegrated completely. Ethan, feeling deeply betrayed by his mother's actions, refused to speak to her. "You chose him over us," he told her during one of their last conversations, his voice cold and final. The words cut deeply, but Linda's actions had left little room for reconciliation. In her desperation, Linda turned to alcohol as a coping mechanism. Her drinking escalated rapidly, culminating in a DUI incident that made local headlines. Driving home intoxicated, she crashed her car into the garage door of her house, narrowly avoiding serious injury. Ethan, who was at home at the time, called Jim in tears, saying, "I can't stay here anymore, Dad." The incident was a turning point. Jim, with the help of his lawyer, filed for a change in custody. The judge, already familiar with the family's story, deemed Linda unfit to care for Ethan and granted custody to Jim's parents, who offered a stable and loving environment. Ethan moved in with his grandparents, finding a sense of security that had been missing since the ordeal began. Linda, left alone and battling her demons, attempted to start over in a new town. However, the stigma of her actions followed her, making it difficult to rebuild her life. She sent Ethan cards on his birthday and during the holidays, but he showed little interest in reconnecting. Her once perfect life was now a distant memory, replaced by regret and isolation. After the dust settled, Jim Freeland moved in with his parents to start a new chapter. The small, comfortable home became a refuge for him and Ethan as they worked to rebuild their lives. The overwhelming public support Jim had received during the trial extended far beyond the courtroom. Donations from the GoFundMe campaign covered his legal fees, and even after his probation began, the fund continued to grow. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, sharing their own stories of betrayal and resilience. This newfound financial stability gave Jim the breathing room he needed to focus on healing, both for himself and for Ethan. Jim took a modest job at a local hardware store, appreciating the normalcy of the work and the quiet camaraderie of his coworkers. Every day felt like a small victory, a step away from the chaos of the past. Though the media frenzy gradually subsided, Jim's story remained an example of overcoming adversity. When people recognized him in public, they often approached with kind words, further boosting his confidence. Living under the same roof with his parents, and Ethan allowed Jim to prioritize what truly mattered, his relationship with his son. The ordeal had brought them closer together, creating a bond forged through shared pain and mutual support. Jim encouraged Ethan to open up about his feelings, often taking him on long fishing trips where the tranquil environment made it easier to talk. Through these moments, Jim began to see Ethan thrive. The teenager, once burdened by his mother's betrayal and the chaos it caused, started excelling in school and sports. Jim made it a point to attend every soccer game, cheering loudly from the sidelines, which meant the world to Ethan. After scoring a winning goal during a particularly intense match, Ethan ran straight to his dad on the sidelines and said, "Thanks for never giving up on me, Dad." That moment became a cornerstone in their relationship, a testament to the strength they found in each other. Together, they also worked on projects around the house, fixing things and learning new skills. Jim saw these activities as an opportunity to teach Ethan about resilience and independence. The teenager began to flourish, his confidence growing with each passing day. Jim's parents, too, played a pivotal role in providing a stable and loving environment, helping Ethan regain his sense of security. Though Jim wasn't actively looking for love, life had other plans. During a volunteer event organized by the local community, he met Natalia, a Ukrainian refugee who had fled the war with her 2 children. Natalia was strong, compassionate, and full of wisdom gained from her own struggles. She admired Jim's resilience and found his devotion to Ethan deeply inspiring. Their connection was immediate, but it grew steadily and naturally. Natalia appreciated Jim for who he was, not for the media spectacle that had once surrounded him. She brought a sense of warmth and calm into his life that he hadn't realized he was missing. Jim, in turn, became a source of support for Natalia as she adjusted to life in a new country. Ethan quickly bonded with Natalia's 2 children, enjoying their shared sense of humor and love for sports. The 4 of them spent weekends exploring local parks, playing soccer, and enjoying family dinners cooked by Natalia, whose Ukrainian recipes became a household favorite. Jim felt a deep sense of joy seeing Ethan happy and surrounded by a loving environment. As their relationship blossomed, Jim and Natalia decided to take the next step, blending their families into one. They moved into a larger house where everyone had their own space, but could come together for meals and movie nights. For the first time in years, Jim felt like he had a future filled with hope and love. Jim's new beginning wasn't about erasing the past, but about building something stronger from its lessons. With Ethan thriving, his parents' unwavering support, and Natalia's love and partnership, Jim found himself living a life he never thought possible. While the scars of betrayal would always remain, they became reminders of his resilience and the journey that led him to a better place. Jim often reflected on how far they had come. The road had been painful and filled with uncertainty, but it had also revealed the strength of family, the importance of honesty, and the power of love to heal. As he looked around at his new family, gathered together on a quiet evening, Jim couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, he felt whole again. As Jim sat on the porch of his family's new home, watching the sunset, he reflected on the tumultuous journey that had brought him to this moment. The betrayal he endured had shaken him to his core, but it had also taught him invaluable lessons. He realized that self-respect and resilience were the cornerstones of rebuilding a life after hardship. While the pain of Linda's actions would never fully disappear, it no longer defined him. Instead, it became a reminder of his strength and his ability to rise above even the darkest moments. Jim shared his story openly when asked, emphasizing the importance of moving forward. "You don't have to let someone else's betrayal destroy you," he would say. "Every ending is a chance for a new beginning. You just have to believe you're strong enough to build it." This message resonated with others, turning his personal struggle into a source of hope for those facing similar challenges. Ethan's transformation was one of Jim's greatest sources of pride. The shy, uncertain boy who had once been caught in the crossfire of his parents' turmoil had grown into a confident, empathetic young man. Jim's unwavering support and example of resilience inspired Ethan to strive for his best, both in academics and sports. At his high school graduation, Ethan stood at the podium, addressing his classmates and their families. His speech highlighted the lessons he'd learned about perseverance and integrity, but the most poignant moment came when he spoke directly to Jim. "Dad, you taught me how to stand tall, no matter what life throws at us. I wouldn't be here today without your strength and guidance. Thank you for never giving up on me. Or on us." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jim couldn't hold back his tears. Seeing Ethan succeed and carry himself with dignity was the ultimate validation of everything they had endured together. It was proof that even in the aftermath of betrayal, love and resilience could forge something unbreakable. As the years went by, Jim found himself surrounded by a family built on trust, love, and shared strength. Natalia and her children had become integral parts of their lives, and together with Ethan, they formed a new, blended family that thrived on mutual respect and understanding. Every challenge they faced was met with unity and determination. One evening, as the family gathered for a celebratory dinner marking Ethan's acceptance into college, Jim raised his glass for a toast. "To second chances," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Life has thrown a lot at us, but we've come out stronger. And through it all, at least," he paused with a smile, "I still have my balls." Laughter filled the room as the family toasted to their shared journey and the bright future ahead. Jim's closing sentiment, once a defiant declaration of pride, had evolved into a symbol of his determination, resilience, and the personal victory he had achieved. The story ended as the family embraced their fresh start, embodying the themes of love, forgiveness, and hope. Jim knew the road hadn't been easy, but looking around the room at the people he cherished, he realized it had been worth every step.